The Bay of Marathon was still. The water mirrored the morning sky, undisturbed by wind or tide. Then, the horizon fractured. A single mast broke the line, followed by another and another. Within minutes, the sea began to churn. 600 ships emerged from the haze, their hulls cutting deep into the Aegean water. They arrived not as a fleet, but as a moving continent of wood and sail. The sheer volume of the vessels blocked the sun, casting long, jagged shadows across the sand. Each ship carried the weight of an empire, a relentless tide of timber closing the distance to the shore. There was no sound of birds, no rustle of grass, only the rhythmic, heavy thud of oars striking the surf in unison. The bay, once vast and open, vanished beneath the mass of the Persian armada. The countdown to the end of Athens had begun. The landing ramps slammed into the wet sand with a series of sharp, rhythmic cracks. Before the echoes died, the first wave of soldiers vaulted over the gunwales. They hit the surf, water splashing against their shins, and pushed forward until the ground held their weight. 10,000 men poured from the ships in a steady, unending stream. They moved with the precision of a machine, forming lines that stretched from the waterline to the base of the dunes. The sunlight caught the surfaces of their shields, turning the beach into a shimmering, metallic field. Every step they took packed the sand harder. They did not shout. They did not hesitate. They simply claimed the space, their presence expanding until the shoreline was entirely consumed by the mass of the army. The sheer density of the force was absolute. Where the beach had been empty, it was now a solid wall of human intent. They stood in formation, a vast, bristling expanse of power that made the surrounding landscape look small and fragile. The disparity was clear. The sand groaned under the collective weight of an empire, and the beach was no longer a place of nature, but a platform for war. High above the chaos of the shoreline, Miltiades stood on the jagged edge of the ridge. He did not look at the sea, but at the sand. His eyes traced the lines of the enemy, measuring the depth of their ranks and the distance between their formations. 9,000 men stood behind him, their breathing heavy and irregular, but Miltiades remained still. He gripped the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white against the metal. He watched the Persian commanders signal their units, the tactical precision of the invaders mocking the small, uneven cluster of his own forces. The math was simple and brutal. If he stood his ground, the city of Athens would be reduced to ash before the next moon. He felt the weight of the ridge beneath his boots. He turned his head, scanning the terrain for a weakness in the enemy's confidence. There was none. Every movement on the beach was a testament to the power of the empire below. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, visualizing the map of the plain, then opened them again to lock his gaze onto the center of the Persian line. Miltiades turned his back on the ridge and walked into the center of his camp. He stopped before his captains, drew a line in the dirt with his heel, and pointed toward the plain. He ordered the center thinned to a mere few ranks. He commanded the flanks to be reinforced, doubling the depth of the wings. The men froze. A captain stepped forward, his hand hovering over his blade, and shook his head. This was not how battles were fought. This was not how they survived. Miltiades did not argue. He grabbed the captain by the shoulder and forced him to look down at the ground, tracing the new formation in the dust until the logic of the trap became clear. The soldiers began to move. They broke their tight, square blocks, shuffling across the uneven terrain to reach their new positions. The sound of boots scraping against rock filled the air, a restless, grinding noise that signaled the end of their old doctrine. They looked at the thin line in the center, and then at the heavy, dense walls on the edges. The uncertainty was visible in the way they gripped their weapons, knuckles straining, eyes darting toward the Persian line below. They were being asked to gamble their lives on a maneuver that defied every tradition. Miltiades walked the length of the new line, pushing a man here, adjusting a shield there, ensuring the thin center held its shape. The formation was set. The risk was absolute. The Greek line began to stretch. It moved like a living cord, pulling taut across the uneven ground of the plain. Miltiades walked behind the ranks, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Persian fleet had disgorged its thousands. As the Greeks extended their reach, the Persian front shifted in response, widening to match the Athenian span. The two lines grew, mirroring each other until they formed a jagged, human wall that cut the plain in two. A soldier near the center looked left, then right, seeing the thinness of his own row compared to the massive depth of the flanks. The realization passed through the ranks like a tremor. There was no turning back now. The formation was too wide to retreat. Every man stood rigid, his grip tightening on his spear, watching the Persian soldiers adjust their own positions. The space between the two forces narrowed, the air growing thick with the scent of dust and impending collision. No one spoke. The sun crested the eastern hills, spilling light across the plain of Marathon. It hit the bronze surfaces of the Greek line, turning the formation into a jagged, shimmering wall. Across the narrow strip of neutral ground, the Persian camp remained equally still. The dawn brought no wind. The air hung heavy and motionless, trapping the heat and the smell of dry grass. Seconds stretched into minutes. A soldier in the front rank wiped sweat from his eyes, his hand trembling slightly. He gripped his spear tighter, the wood biting into his palm. Down the line, a man shifted his weight, the sound of his sandals grinding against the pebbles echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet. The silence was not empty. It was a physical weight pressing down on every man present. Miltiades stood motionless, his eyes scanning the Persian ranks for any sign of movement, any flicker of hesitation. None came. The enemy remained a silent, dense mass, their bows held ready, their eyes fixed on the Greek center. The psychological pressure mounted with every heartbeat. Men stopped breathing in rhythm, their chests tight, their focus narrowing until the entire world existed only within the few feet of ground they occupied. The stillness was a test of nerves, a slow-motion tightening of a spring that had to snap. The two armies stood locked in a stalemate of anticipation, waiting for the spark that would shatter the morning calm. The signal came not as a shout, but as a single, resonant blast of a trumpet that tore through the morning haze. Miltiades raised his hand, and the command rippled down the line. Every soldier braced for the rhythmic, measured step of a traditional advance. Across the field, the Persian commanders watched, their bodies relaxed, expecting the Greeks to march slowly into the reach of their archers. They expected a crawl. They expected a predictable, grinding approach. Instead, the Greek line shuddered and lurched forward. It did not move with the cadence of a parade. It moved with the sudden, jarring energy of a landslide. The Persian frontline soldiers leaned forward, squinting against the glare, trying to process the sight. The Greeks were not marching. The ground began to vibrate. The Persian archers hesitated, their fingers hovering over their bowstrings, waiting for the familiar slow-motion target to present itself. The Athenian line surged, the distance closing with a speed that forced the Persian ranks to scramble backward. Confusion flickered across the faces of the invaders. The transition from a walk to a run was instantaneous. The Greek line accelerated, boots pounding the dry earth in a thunderous, rhythmic beat that shook the plain. The distance between the two armies vanished. 10,000 feet struck the ground in unison, creating a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the souls of the Persian soldiers. The pace quickened. It was no longer a tactical maneuver. It was a desperate, high-speed collision course. The air whistled past the ears of the charging men. Every stride pushed them closer to the enemy, the speed increasing until the formation became a blur of motion. The sound of the charge grew into a deafening roar. The ground beneath them seemed to liquefy under the sheer force of the impact. The Persians stood frozen, their eyes wide as the wall of men closed the gap. There was no time to adjust, no time to retreat, and no time to think. The Greeks were a kinetic wave, a force of nature. They leaned into the run, their bodies driving forward, their focus locked on the line ahead. The gap shrank to 50 paces, then 20, then 10. The momentum was absolute, a crushing weight of human will barreling toward the shoreline, leaving the Persians with only a heartbeat to brace. The Persian archers finally broke their paralysis. Thousands of bows snapped taut in a single, fluid motion. The command to fire echoed across the field, a sharp bark that signaled the end of the silence. Above the plain, the sky seemed to bruise as the first volley rose. Thousands of shafts arched into the air, blotting out the sun and turning the morning light into a sudden, flickering dusk. The sound was not a whistle, but a low, sustained hum that grew in pitch as the projectiles reached their apex. The Greeks did not slow. They saw the shadow sweep over the ground, a dark, moving cloud that raced toward them. Every man lowered his head, tucking his chin and driving his shoulders forward, turning his body into a wedge against the coming storm. The arrows began to strike. They thudded into the earth, kicked up plumes of dust, and skittered across the dry grass. Some found their mark, but the momentum of the charge was too great to halt. The Greeks surged through the rain of wood and iron, their stride unbroken, their eyes fixed on the line of men waiting ahead. The final 10 paces were a gauntlet of whistling death, and they ran straight into the heart of it. The final stride ended. There was no hesitation, only the brutal physics of two masses meeting at maximum velocity. The collision hit like a landslide. Wood splintered against wood with a sound like a forest snapping in a gale. The front ranks of both armies slammed into each other, the force of the impact throwing men backward, their feet leaving the ground. It was a bone-shattering crash that vibrated through the very earth of the plain. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. Then, the pressure took over. The front lines became a tangled, shifting mass of limbs and straining muscles. Men were crushed between the weight of their own ranks and the immovable wall of the enemy. The air was filled with the grunt of exertion. The orderly lines dissolved into a frantic, localized struggle. Every inch of ground was contested with desperate, grinding force. The collision had turned the plain into a slaughterhouse. The lines were locked, and the true test of endurance had begun. The initial momentum stalled. The Persian mass, deeper and heavier, began to exert a relentless, grinding pressure against the Greek center. It was a slow, agonizing shift. The front ranks of the Greeks felt the earth churn beneath their heels as they were forced backward, inch by agonizing inch. The line, once straight and taut, began to bow inward. The center was thinning, stretched to its absolute limit by the sheer weight of the opposing force. Men in the middle rows stumbled, their footing lost in the churned mud and the press of bodies behind them. The gap widened. A ripple of panic moved through the ranks as the soldiers realized the ground they were losing could not be reclaimed. The Persian soldiers sensed the weakness. They surged forward, their shouts rising in a triumphant roar that drowned out the cries of the struggling Greeks. The center was buckling, the formation bending. Every man in the middle felt the terrifying reality of the situation. The line was failing. The pressure was no longer a push, but a crushing weight. The soldiers fought to hold their ground, digging their heels into the dirt, but the momentum was against them. They were being pushed back toward the rear. The center was a heartbeat away from shattering. The Persians surged, their confidence peaking as they pushed deeper into the gap. They did not see the movement on the wings. On both ends of the Greek line, the soldiers stopped their forward momentum. They did not retreat. They turned. With a unified, rhythmic shift, the flanks pivoted inward. The straight line transformed into a massive, closing gate. The Persian soldiers in the center, still focused on the retreating Greeks, suddenly found their sides exposed. The Greek flank slammed into the Persian mass from the left and the right, cutting off their path of advance. The pressure that had been pushing the Greeks back was now trapped, squeezed by the closing jaws of the pincer. The Persians were no longer the attackers. They were the prey. The momentum shifted instantly. The Greeks on the flanks drove forward with renewed force, their weight pinning the Persians into a dense, immovable knot. The trap had snapped shut. The Persians, caught in the center of the pincer, realized too late that their forward progress had been a fatal mistake. The realization hit the Persian ranks like a physical blow. The soldiers in the center, who had been pushing forward only seconds ago, suddenly looked left and right, to find their comrades replaced by a wall of advancing Greeks. The momentum of their own charge became their undoing, as they were packed too tightly to turn or defend. A ripple of disbelief passed through the front lines. The invincibility they had carried across the sea vanished in an instant. A Persian officer shouted orders, trying to hold the line, but his voice was swallowed by the rising tide of screams. He was knocked aside by his own men, who were now scrambling to find a way out of the closing jaws. The formation fractured. The rigid, disciplined lines dissolved into a chaotic mass of bodies pushing against one another. Every soldier was now fighting only for his own survival, shoving past his neighbor to reach the rear. The pride of the empire was gone, replaced by the raw, primal instinct to flee. The Greeks did not let up. Their rhythmic, synchronized pressure, turning the panic into a stampede. The Persians broke ranks entirely, abandoning their positions and turning their backs to the fight. They scrambled over the uneven ground, tripping over the fallen and trampling those who stumbled. The realization was absolute. They were not winning, they were being hunted. The once mighty force was now a broken, fleeing mob. The retreat turned into a desperate race for the shoreline. The Persians hit the sand, their boots sinking into the wet earth as they lunged toward the waiting ships. There was no order left, only the frantic scramble to reach the water. The Greeks followed them with relentless, measured strides. They did not stop at the edge of the land. They waded into the surf, the water churning white around their knees. The tide became a trap for the fleeing soldiers. As the Persians waded deeper, the resistance of the water slowed their escape, turning them into stationary targets. The Greeks closed the distance, their movements sharp and efficient. They hacked at the backs of the struggling men, the sound of metal meeting resistance echoing over the roar of the waves. A Persian soldier turned to block a blow, but he slipped. He never stood up. The water began to turn dark, swirling with the debris of the rout. The ships were only yards away, but the distance felt impossible to bridge. Men clawed at the hulls, begging for the sailors to pull them aboard, but the pressure from behind was too great. The Greeks pushed forward, cutting off the path to the vessels. Every step into the sea was a fight for survival, and the surf was quickly becoming a wall of iron. The pursuit was absolute, turning the shoreline into a final, bloody bottleneck. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, jagged shadows across the sand. By the time the light turned deep amber, the frantic noise of the battle had faded into a hollow, rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore. The beach was no longer a place of conflict, but a vast, silent graveyard. 6,000 bodies lay scattered across the dunes and the surf, a testament to the total collapse of the invading force. The Greeks stood amidst the wreckage, their breathing heavy, their movements slow and deliberate. There was no cheering, only the grim reality of the cost and the scale of what they had achieved. The impossible had become the present. A small group of survivors clung to the last few ships drifting away from the coast, but the threat was effectively erased. Miltiades walked the length of the shoreline, his boots crunching on the debris. He stopped where the sand met the tide, looking out toward the horizon. The victory was absolute, a crushing blow that defied every expectation. The plain of Marathon was quiet. The survival of the city was now a hard-won fact. The silence on the beach was shattered by a single, urgent realization. Athens did not know. They were waiting behind their walls, fearing the worst, unaware that the invaders had been broken. Phidippides stood near the edge of the dunes, his chest heaving as he scanned the horizon. He looked at the spear in his hand, the wood slick with the remnants of the day, then looked toward the road leading back to the city. He drove the butt of the spear deep into the sand, leaving it standing upright as a marker of the battle. He shed his heavy gear, letting the plates and straps fall to the ground with a dull thud. He needed speed, not protection. He adjusted his grip, took a sharp, steadying breath, and turned his back on the carnage of the shore. He did not look back. He took one step, then another, and then he began to run. His feet found the hard-packed dirt of the trail. The road was a ribbon of gray stone and packed earth that seemed to stretch into infinity. Phidippides kept his head down, watching the ground pass beneath his feet in a hypnotic, rhythmic blur. Every mile was a battle against his own biology. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps that tore at his throat, and the sweat stung his eyes, forcing him to blink constantly to keep the path in focus. His legs felt like leaden weights, each stride requiring a conscious, agonizing effort to lift and plant. He passed the 5-mile marker, then the 10, his pace never wavering despite the burning in his lungs. The landscape shifted from the coastal scrub to the rocky foothills, the incline testing his resolve with every upward slope. He did not slow down when his side began to cramp, nor when the darkness of the night deepened, obscuring the path ahead. He relied on the memory of the road, his feet finding the familiar ruts and stones by instinct. His pulse hammered against his ribs, a frantic, irregular drumbeat that matched the pounding of his heart. He was no longer a man of war, but a vessel of pure, kinetic purpose. The miles fell away behind him, each one a testament to the sheer, stubborn refusal to collapse. He was a machine, fueled by the desperate need to deliver the truth, to the gates of Athens. The massive stone gates of Athens loomed out of the twilight, solid and unyielding. Phidippides stumbled as the flat ground replaced the uneven trail, his knees buckling under the sudden change in terrain. He clawed at the air, his fingers brushing the rough texture of the gatehouse wall to steady himself. The guards on the ramparts shifted, their spears catching the dying light as they squinted at the lone, dust-caked figure approaching from the dark. He did not have the breath to call out a warning, only the singular, driving need to finish the task. He forced his legs to move, dragging his feet across the threshold of the city. His vision narrowed to a pinprick of light, the world spinning as his heart hammered a final, frantic rhythm against his ribs. He stopped in the center of the gate, his chest heaving, his throat raw and dry. He drew in one last, massive lungful of air, bracing his core against the encroaching darkness. He looked toward the inner square, opened his mouth, and forced the word out with every remaining ounce of his strength. "Nike!" The sound cracked, sharp and absolute. He did not wait for the echo. His legs gave way instantly, and he hit the stone floor with a heavy, final thud. He did not move again. The silence in the square deepened, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the guards' sandals as they rushed toward the fallen figure. They knelt, checked for a pulse, and looked up at the empty road. The message was delivered. The city remained untouched. Within the hour, the news rippled through the streets, reaching the council chambers and the homes of the citizens. The threat that had loomed over the coast for days had dissolved into the surf at Marathon. The Persian fleet was gone. Athens stood, the walls held. The democratic experiment, once on the brink of erasure, gained a new, hard-won stability. The survival of Athens was no longer a hope. It was a fact, carved into the stone of the gates and the collective memory of a people.